The Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband, is here, and thank you very much indeed for coming in on what must be a very busy time for you. We'll come in a few minutes to help that might be on offer for people here at home. But what about that request made online from Donald Trump to the UK to send ships to help secure the Straits of Hormuz? Is the government considering that?
Well, it is very important, as you've explained, that we get the Strait of Hormuz reopened. And we have already been talking with our allies, including the US, about this. The Prime Minister spoke to European leaders about it last week. The Foreign Secretary was in Saudi Arabia talking to Gulf countries. So it obviously is something that we're looking at. We want to work with our partners on this.
So you are considering sending ships. What about drones?
I'm not going to get into the obviously operational details of what might or might not happen. I think it's a priority for the world that the Strait is reopened. Obviously, the best and simplest way to do that is to de-escalate the conflict, and I think it's important to underline that. As you imply in your question, there are different ways that we could contribute, including with mine hunting drones. All of these things are being looked at, but in concert with our allies.
So you are considering sending more drones to the region? That's on the table too?
I'm not going to obviously speculate on it, but I think you can, for reasons you'll understand, but you can rest assured that, any options that can help to get the Strait reopened are being looked at in concert with our allies. But as I say, ending this conflict, we don't want a nuclear Iran, but ending this conflict is the best and surest way to get the Strait reopened.
When might you make a decision on sending drones or ships such as the Navy has?
Forgive me, Laura, I'm not going to speculate on that.
Is it clear to you what Donald Trump wants? Because this time last week, he was saying to the UK, we don't need you. We don't want your aircraft carrier.
Well, look, let me say it from our point of view as the government. Keir Starmer made the decision not to join the initial attack
encouraged by you?
on Iran. It was Keir Starmer's decision.
Encouraged
and
by
I think
you?
it was. I'm not going to talk about that. It was the right leadership for the country, because the lesson of Iraq is that we don't commit our forces unless there is a clear plan, clear aims. And I think Keir Starmer made the right choice. At the same time, he also made the right choice, I believe, to allow our bases to be used to protect our allies and protect our citizens against indiscriminate Iranian attacks. But what he's been about throughout this conflict is de-escalation, and that's what we continue to work for.
But are the aims of this war clear to you now?
Look, what I would say is that the US made its decision with Israel to launch this initial attack on Iran. I think we don't want to see a nuclear Iran. That is shared by all of us. But I think it's in all of our interests, for the economic and other reasons that you've talked about, to bring this conflict to an end.
And we'll come on to that. But you've said plainly, as the Prime Minister did to the country in the House of Commons, that the aims of the war weren't clear to him at the beginning. Are they clear to you now as a government?
Forgive me, Laura. I'm not. Tempting as it is to sort of talk about this in a public setting. I think the US
made. You talked about it 2 weeks ago.
The US. Well, the US.
When they began.
The US made its decisions. The US made its decisions to begin to launch these attacks on Iran. But there is a shared objective, which is we don't want a nuclear Iran. But I think the priority now, at this stage in the conflict, is to make sure we don't have a nuclear Iran, but to bring the conflict to an end.
I think people listening to you will, though, observe how you are hesitant to give a clear answer on whether or not you think the Americans have straightforward war aims, and probably conclude, and tell us if it's unfair, probably conclude that the government is not sure what the Americans are trying to do.
I think it's for the US to talk about their war aims. I'm saying to you what the position of the British government is, which is to de-escalate this conflict.
But when you hear Donald Trump that he might hit a vital Iranian oil hub on Kharg Island again, just for fun, what do you think of that?
I think what you're tempting me to do, Laura, is to sort of speculate or commentate on things that...
I'm asking you about the conduct of a war by our closest ally. That's not asking you as a cabinet minister to speculate. Is that appropriate conduct?
You're putting some words that Donald Trump put to me. I don't think anyone's in any doubt about our position on this conflict. We didn't join the initial conflict. It was right not to join the initial conflict. We were deeply worried that there wasn't a proper plan. and about some of the consequences of it. And I think the British people will be thinking that Keir Starmer showed the right leadership for the country when actually the opposition parties were saying we should go gung-ho into it.
And is there a proper plan now?
I think I've answered that question.
Well, you've hinted that you don't think there is a proper plan now.
The plan now has to be to de-escalate this conflict, and that's what we're working with our allies on.
Let's then talk about what's happening at home. So the oil price has gone up around the world. The petrol price here at home has gone up. You've suggested that there's price gouging, so unfair hikes of prices by businesses exploiting consumers. What's your evidence of that?
Look, let me come to your question, but let me just say overall, we're determined to fight the corner of the British people throughout this conflict. And that's what people would have expect of us. And Rachel Reeves and I warned companies, petrol retailers, heating oil companies, not to engage in profiteering, not to engage in price gouging, because it's incredibly important they don't. There is evidence this market hasn't been working well. In December of last year, the Competition Commission, the Competition and Markets Authority said it wasn't working well. We were warning them against it. And look, some of them didn't like it, but that's tough, because we're going to fight for the British people in this conflict.
But what is your evidence that it has actually been happening in the last couple of weeks? Because the retailers, some of them thought that you were very inflammatory by coming out in the way that you did. There were even suggestions.
It was a warning shot.
So you don't have evidence?
No, it was a warning shot.
But to be clear, do you have evidence?
We have evidence that this market wasn't working well. We have bad examples in the heating oil sector, for example, of what people have been facing.
In the last couple of weeks?
Yes, absolutely. And many of your viewers will be watching this program and probably screaming at the telly saying, I felt hard done by. That's why I've been talking to the Competition and Markets Authority throughout the week. That's why they've said they're watching these markets closely. I don't think these are markets that have been working well, frankly. I think there's a longer term look that needs to be done at how these markets are working. For now, I think it's so important. Look, the thing I learned from previous crises, the British people expect us to be by their side. And no vested interest, no powerful interest will stand in the way of that.
But it's also important, I'm sure you'd agree as the Secretary of State, that you're doing that based on evidence. And I just want to show people, you'll be familiar with this chart, but I want to show everyone what makes up the cost of a litre of petrol. And actually it's in the screen here if you just want to have a look. So you can see the wholesale cost, 33%, so that's what the retailer's having to pay. 17% VAT, 6% is the margin for the retailer. The biggest chunk, fuel duty, that goes to you in the government. So you're in control of the biggest chunk of the cost that people pay at the pump. So
that's why we've frozen fuel duty. That's why we've frozen fuel duty.
And if prices stay as high as they are, you're not going to put it up in September, are you?
Well, that's what, in a way, let me answer that by saying this, which is we don't know, I'll be candid with you, we don't know how long this conflict is going to go on. And therefore, with 5 months to go till September, we'll have to see where we are, obviously. But let me say what we've done. It's really important to say this, because what you've seen from Rachel Reeves is freezing fuel duty, taking action so that energy bills will come onto them, I'm sure, are going to fall in April. That didn't come out of the sky. That was because of the decisions that the Chancellor took. So look, we will stand by the British people in this crisis, and we'll do what it takes to do that.
So if the oil price is as high as it is right now, you're hinting very strongly there's no way
you're asking me to sort of speculate on what the Chancellor's going to do on fuel duty, and you could have experienced enough to know. But look, I am sending you a clear message. I'm sending a clear message, which is, we're going to stand by people in this crisis.
When that comes on then to energy bills, we should say clearly to people who have been desperately worried about the cost of heating oil, the Chancellor will give details tomorrow of tens of millions of pounds of support for them with bills, which I think will start to flow pretty quickly. But there are bigger concerns about what might be coming down the track, whether that's aviation fuel and the price of holidays or the price of food because of what's happened to the cost of fertiliser. But the biggest concern is energy bills. Now, as you've said, and we'll say this loud and clearly, bills are expected to come down in the short term. But there are,
and that is an important reassurance.
That is a very important thing to say. But as we heard from Sharon White, there's a big concern about what might happen later in the year. If there are big increases in bills, at what level would the government step in?
Well, let me put it this way. We took action in the budget to cut bills because we know the cost of living crisis is the number one issue facing the British people. And let's be frank about this, people were really struggling even before this crisis began. And so obviously we are preparing for all eventualities. And I think it's right that we do that preparatory work, learning the lessons of the last crisis when Russia invaded Ukraine, and that if it is, and the best I can say, Laura, and you'll find this a bit frustrating, maybe your viewers will too, but if it's necessary to intervene, we will. But as the regulator said, we don't know what's going to happen to the energy price cap in July. It all depends how long, what happens to the gas price and how long it goes
But
on.
as you say clearly you want to be on people's side, and that means also giving them reassurance. So Liz Truss, Conservative Prime Minister, when the average bill was on its way to £3,500 a year,
we're not going to let that happen.
She spent tens of billions of pounds of taxpayers' money to cap it at £2,500 a year. So if it was on its way up to 3.5, would you act in that same way?
We're obviously not going to let that.
So
We're obviously not going to let that happen.
Would you give universal support to every household in the country? Because that's what she did. The richest man in the country and the poorest man in the country.
That's obviously sort of very, very speculative.
It's not speculative. You're the energy secretary.
No,
you discussed it with energy firms this week. It's not speculation.
No. I understand that. Look, it all depends on what the impacts are, and that I think is the fairest way I can put it. We don't know. You know, we've so far been a few weeks through what they call the observation window for the 3 months of the price cap. You know, what happens to the gas price has gone up significantly, but you know, how long this conflict goes on will shape what happens to the gas price and what happens to bills.
But there's a question of principle about whether or not you would do what Liz Truss
depends on the scale
did
of it. Well, it depends on
and
the scale.
give support to everybody or not.
Well, frankly, it depends on the scale of
So
the
you
impact.
might give universal support.
Well, as I say, it depends on the scale of the impact. Look, if you look at what we've done so far, we've taken a universal decision to cut bills because we knew the cost of living crisis wasn't just hitting the poorest people in our society. Let me make this point. But we've given extra help to the poorest through the expansion of the warm home discount.
You could, some of your observers and some people in your party and also some of your critics say that you could, as you want the UK to be more self-reliant, you could put aside some of your own resistance to fossil fuels and you could say, let's go for everything we've got. Let's approve now new drilling at Rosebank and Jackdaw, big oil and gas fields off the northeast coast. They've already got licenses. As the Energy Secretary, you could say, fine, let's go. That would increase supply. That might even provide some jobs. Why not do that now in this time of crisis?
Let me answer that directly. Rosebank and Jackdaw are planning decisions. I can't comment on them, but let me answer the question nonetheless. We're not going to learn the wrong lessons of this crisis. It's really important your viewers know this. The price of gas is set on the international markets. Whether it comes from the North Sea, which is an important resource, or is imported, it's set at the same. We are a price, Sharon said it, we're a price taker, not a price maker. There is one lesson from this crisis, Laura, and only one in my view for the long term on energy policy, and that is we need homegrown, clean power that we control. That's why today I'm announcing we're going further and faster on that, bringing forward our next renewables auction, making plug-in solar, which has worked well in Germany, available for the first time in the shops here. That is the way we get prices down. And if there is one lesson we must learn from this crisis, we cannot keep being on this fossil fuel roller coaster. And you know, it is important that this is the mission that this government came in with. Some people said it was wrong. Some people said, oh, it's not the right thing for the country. Unfortunately, very sadly, what this crisis demonstrates to us yet again, as Russia-Ukraine did, is it is absolutely the right thing for the country.
But there are people who agree with you about renewables, but who also say, let's go full steam ahead on that. And let's also do every single thing that this country can in the North Sea to produce oil and gas, wherever it is then sold, because it would increase supply, it would create jobs. It's not a one or the other. Briefly, are you just going to keep your fingers in your ears and say no,
I'm
no,
not
no
doing
to
that. I'm not doing that. The North Sea is an incredibly important resource to us. We're going to use it for decades to come. We've taken decisions to keep existing oil and gas fields open for their lifetime, including with tiebacks.
But made their life a nightmare.
But let me just make this point to you, because some people talk about these new licenses. The independent energy system operator says that will make no material difference. The North Sea is a declining resource. It's down 75% since the turn of the millennium. And what they say is for our energy security, the best thing we can do is clean homegrown power.